I spent my whole life protecting my brother from our abusive father. But then I walked in on their dinner, and they were celebrating my arrest. If you asked anyone in town who the real monster of our family was, they'd all say the same name without hesitation: Richard Maddox. My father. To the outside world, he was a decorated veteran, a man of rigid values and discipline, someone who coached the high school football team like a second religion. But behind closed doors, he ruled our house with fists and silence. The kind of silence that screamed louder than anything else. My name is Emily Maddox. And from the moment I turned 10, I stopped being a child and started being a shield. A shield for my younger brother, Caleb. Caleb was the golden child. Soft-spoken, sweet, the kind of boy teachers adored and girls wrote letters to. But he was also fragile. Not weak, never that, but delicate in a way that made my father furious. Dad believed boys needed to be hardened, like steel. But Caleb wasn't steel. He was light. And I knew if I didn't step in, that light would be smothered. I took the hits. Literally. Every time Caleb dropped a dish, I said it was me. When he snuck out to hang with friends, I told Dad I'd forced him. The punishments were brutal: a belt, a fist, sometimes worse. But I kept telling myself it was worth it, that I could take it, and Caleb couldn't. That someday, we'd get out. Our mother died when I was 12. Car crash. I think a part of me died with her, the part that still believed in miracles. After that, there was no buffer between us and Dad. Just me and Caleb, clinging to each other in a house full of rage. I used to whisper stories to Caleb at night, stories about escape, about cities where no one knew our last name, where we'd live in a tiny apartment with a leaky roof and freedom in our bones. He'd fall asleep with a smile, and I'd stay awake, planning, calculating, counting coins in a jar, reading self-defense books, preparing. At 16, I picked up shifts at a diner after school. Dad hated it, said girls shouldn't serve people like beggars, but he didn't stop me. Probably because it meant I wasn't home as much. Probably because he liked having Caleb alone. That thought haunted me. I started locking Caleb's door at night from the inside. I'd leave my own bedroom unlocked, a decoy. I couldn't stop Dad entirely, but I could control where the blows landed. And that made me feel powerful. In control. But deep down, I knew I was just playing chess with a madman. One misstep, and we'd lose everything. Then one night, when I was 17 and Caleb was 14, something happened that changed the course of everything. It was raining, like the kind of storm that felt biblical. The power went out, and the house plunged into darkness. I heard yelling downstairs. Not just Dad's voice, Caleb's too. It wasn't usual. Caleb never yelled back. I sprinted down the stairs, slipping once on the wet floor, and burst into the living room to find Dad holding Caleb by the collar. His eyes wild, mouth foaming with fury. Caleb was crying, but not like a child, like someone breaking. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed the fireplace poker and swung. The blow landed square against Dad's shoulder. He screamed, stumbled back, and before he could retaliate, I stood between them like I always had, panting, trembling, unafraid. "If you touch him again," I said, voice trembling but cold, "you'll need a second arm to lift your next beer. And I swear, I'll break that one too." For the first time in my life, he didn't hit me. He just looked at me with something that might have been fear. Or something darker. He left the room. But that night, I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. By the time I turned 18, I had a plan. College was out of reach, too expensive, too unrealistic. But I found a trade school a few towns over. They had a small scholarship fund. I applied in secret. I got in. I told Caleb I'd go first, set things up, get a cheap apartment, find a second job, and send for him. He nodded like he understood, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd never lived without me. "You can do this," I told him. "I believe in you." Just a few months. The night I left, he hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. Dad didn't even come out to say goodbye. Freedom tasted strange, like guilt and black coffee. I worked 2 jobs, studied hard, lived on instant noodles and hope. Every weekend, I called Caleb. We'd talk for hours. I sent him care packages, books, music, small things that reminded him I was still close. He kept telling me things were okay at home. I didn't believe him. But I also knew if I pushed, he'd shut down. 2 years passed. I finally had enough saved to bring him to live with me. I called one night, excited, breathless. "Pack your bags," I said. "I found a place. 2 bedrooms. It's not much, but it's ours." There was a long silence on the line. Then Caleb whispered, "I don't think I can." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" I think he's changed. Dad's different now. He's trying." I felt cold all over. "Caleb, what are you saying?" "He goes to church now. He's been sober for almost a year. He even started talking about mom again. Good memories." I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "No, Caleb, that's what abusers do. They break you, then they soften. It's not real. It's bait." But his voice didn't waver. "He's trying. And maybe I should too. I mean, he's still our dad." That was the first time my brother chose him over me. But it wouldn't be the last. Not by a long shot. And when I saw them, years later, sitting together in that restaurant, toasting glasses, laughing while I was out on bail, I realized that night hadn't been the beginning of the end. It had been the warning shot. And I had ignored it. It was a Tuesday morning when the police knocked on my door. I remember the smell of burnt toast and black coffee. I'd just started my shift at the shelter, the place I worked part-time while doing night classes in crisis response, helping women get out of homes like the one I came from. It gave me purpose. It made the past hurt a little less. I opened the door expecting a client or maybe someone asking for donations. Instead, I was met with 2 officers. Stern faces. No nonsense posture. "Emily Maddox?" the older one asked. "Yes. You're under arrest for credit card fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Everything after that blurred into white noise. Me? Fraud? Embezzlement? They handcuffed me in front of the shelter staff. In front of children. I could barely process what was happening. I kept saying there had to be a mistake, asking for clarification, but they just kept reading my rights. I didn't even have a lawyer. I'd never needed one. At the precinct, the questions came rapid fire. Did you or did you not access the nonprofit's bank account using this login? Do you deny transferring over $27,000 across 3 months into a personal checking account? Were you or were you not the sole employee with administrator privileges? I answered every question honestly. No, I never accessed that money. No, I never transferred anything. And yes, I had access, but so did the director. So did 2 others. They told me the evidence was digital and undeniable. The transfers were tied to my IP address, my login credentials, my device. But here's the thing, I was careful, paranoid even. I changed passwords weekly, used 2-factor authentication. I didn't even log into social media from my work devices. I didn't cry, not then. Not even when they kept me in holding overnight. Not when they processed me, took my prints. Not when I called Caleb. That was my first mistake. I didn't even consider anyone else. I didn't call the director, not a lawyer. I called him. And he answered on the second ring. My voice broke. "I'm at the precinct. They arrested me." "Caleb, they think I stole money from the shelter." Silence. "Please," I whispered. "You know I'd never do that. I need you to come." He paused. "I'll see what I can do." See what I can do? I stared at the phone like it had slapped me. That wasn't the Caleb I knew. That wasn't the boy who used to sleep next to my bed because he was scared of thunder. That wasn't the boy I once stood between and a drunken monster. That was someone else. The bail hearing came 3 days later. My public defender was fresh out of law school and terrified. The prosecution brought out screenshots, bank statements, login timestamps. The judge barely blinked. They set my bail at $15,000. $15,000. I didn't have that kind of money. So when Caleb walked into the courtroom, calm, freshly shaven, wearing a pressed shirt and a neutral expression, I felt a crack of hope. But he didn't look at me. Not once. He sat behind the prosecution bench, next to our father. I froze. Dad looked healthier, thinner, polished, his hair combed neatly back, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He had his hand on Caleb's shoulder, like a proud mentor. I wanted to scream, throw the table, make them see how wrong everything was. But all I could do was stare. They didn't post my bail that day. It was a woman from the shelter who did, Sarah, one of the volunteers. She believed me, said she saw how much I gave, how much I worked. She used her own savings to get me out. That kindness broke something in me that prison hadn't. I walked out of that courthouse, nauseous with betrayal. A week later, I went looking for answers. I started with the shelter's network. I wasn't allowed to access the system anymore, but I still had copies of reports I'd written, timestamps of when I'd last logged in. And things didn't add up. There were transfers made on days I wasn't even in town. I'd been at a trauma training conference 3 hours away. I pulled receipts, photos, email confirmations. I built a case. But what disturbed me most wasn't the forgery. It was the IP address logs. Someone had used my credentials from a nearby location. A few times. Even from my home's Wi-Fi. Which meant someone had been inside my apartment. I felt sick. I checked my door frame, my windows, my laptop, everything felt violated. I found a hidden key missing. One only 2 people knew existed. Me and Caleb. That night, I sat on my couch, shivering, staring at the wall. Why? Why would he do this? Was this some elaborate scheme cooked up by Dad? To destroy me for daring to leave? For disobeying? I remembered something from that night years ago. The night I hit Dad with the poker. The look on his face. Not rage. Calculation. He knew then he'd lost control of me. And maybe he'd spent the years since figuring out how to get it back. The next night, I followed them. They weren't subtle. I saw a reservation pop up in Dad's name on a town Facebook group. A dinner at a fancy steakhouse, celebrating redemption and forgiveness. Typical. I waited in the parking lot, watched them through the window. They looked like family. Like mine never had. Caleb laughed, wide, open, carefree. Dad raised a glass. They clinked drinks. Toasted. And then Caleb leaned across the table, pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to Dad. I couldn't see the contents, but I saw the smirk on Dad's face. The same smirk he wore when he beat me for reading boys' books. The same smirk when he found my hidden bruises and said, "Toughen up." And I knew. Whatever was on that paper was another nail in my coffin. I stood outside in the cold for 20 more minutes before turning away. They hadn't seen me. But even if they had, I doubt they'd flinch. Because somewhere along the way, I'd lost Caleb. Not to drugs. Not to depression. Not to trauma. But to him. To the very man I fought so hard to protect him from. And now? They were celebrating my arrest. I went home that night and didn't sleep. Instead, I made tea, sat down, pulled out every record, every screenshot, every shred of evidence I had. And I made a list. Not of people who hurt me, but of people I trusted. Because betrayal doesn't begin with enemies. It begins with the ones you'd burn for. And I had burned my whole life. For him. But now I was the fire. I didn't cry. Not after I saw them at that dinner. Not when I walked home through the freezing wind. Not when I took the longest shower of my life trying to scrub off the feeling of betrayal clinging to my skin like oil. I didn't cry, I converted. Grief has stages, they say. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But they left one out. The stage they don't talk about. The one that comes after all the others have failed. Resolve. The first thing I did was disappear, not physically, but digitally. I wiped my social accounts, changed my phone, tossed out anything with GPS, and burned every bridge they could trace. I quit the shelter officially, thanking them through a cold, emotionless email. I told Sarah I'd return her bail money in full one day. Then I moved. Not far, just far enough, a crumbling studio on the edge of town with no cameras and a landlord who didn't care about names. I paid cash up front and boarded up the windows myself. I was done reacting like a victim. It was time to think like a threat. I made a board. Not on the wall, but in my mind. A mental grid of names, events, betrayals, connected by red strings of motive and manipulation. At the center, Caleb. The boy I'd raised more than my own father had. The boy I'd lied for, bled for, broke for. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had orchestrated this. With Dad. But the question burned. Why? Why would he side with the man who ruined our childhood? Why betray the sister who protected him from bruises and broken bones? Then I remembered that dinner, the paper Caleb handed Dad. A document. Maybe an agreement. A contract. Something clicked. What if this wasn't just revenge? What if this was a deal? I started investigating them the same way I used to investigate cases at the shelter. I pulled property records. My father's name popped up twice in the last year, once for a real estate deal downtown, and again for a donation to a local church, the same one where he claimed he'd found God. He'd rebranded himself, opened a charity, a rehab support foundation for men looking for redemption. I almost laughed. That wasn't forgiveness. It was a front. He'd always been clever, just enough good to bury the rot. But he needed credibility. And that's where Caleb came in. My brother wasn't just playing along. He was the face of it. A smiling, soft-spoken young man who publicly spoke about forgiving the past, letting go of bitterness, and rebuilding family. He gave speeches, interviews. One headline made me freeze. Survivor of childhood abuse partners with his reformed father to help other men change their path. It even mentioned me by name. His estranged sister Emily has had difficulty accepting Richard's transformation. Estranged. Difficult. Like I was the problem. They'd rewritten history, our history, and cast me as the bitter, broken sister who couldn't move on. But it was worse than that. The more I read, the more I realized they were using my story. My scars. My sacrifices. My fight to protect Caleb. They had turned it into a marketing tool. He'd taken everything I gave him and sold it. But I didn't spiral. I sharpened. I needed leverage. So I started small, building a shadow version of myself. Fake names. Online aliases. Anonymous email accounts. I reached out to someone I knew from my past, Jamal, an old IT tech who used to volunteer at the shelter. He owed me a favor. I didn't tell him the full story. Just that I needed help tracing some file transfers and security logs from systems I had once used. And someone had abused. Within 2 days, he sent me a file. Encrypted. Password protected. Whoever framed you, he said in the message, was sloppy. And stupid. Inside were timestamps, IP addresses, system traces, and, most importantly, proof that the access came from a cloned device. Someone had mirrored my laptop through a backdoor. I dug further and found out that months ago, when Caleb visited me one weekend to check in, I let him borrow my laptop for a few hours. Said he needed to check a college application. Now I knew what he was really installing. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. They'd failed me once. They'd do it again. No, I needed a different kind of justice. One that wouldn't just exonerate me, but destroy them. I started building a file. Every transfer. Every login. Every public lie Caleb had told. Then I started collecting private ones. I created a new identity online, a fake reporter from a recovery magazine. I sent Caleb a request for an interview, told him I was deeply inspired by his family story, asked if he'd be open to talking, even just through email. He agreed within an hour. The man was starving for attention. He sent long, winding responses about redemption, forgiveness, triumph, and hidden in his words were contradictions, little slips, details that didn't match the public narrative, references to events that never happened. Phrases like, when Dad and I first planned the foundation. Planned? So it hadn't been a spontaneous reunion. It had been a long game. Con. And I was the loose thread. But the final straw came 1 week later. I received a letter. It was from the state attorney's office. They were moving forward with a full case. The shelter had formally pressed charges. I was going to trial. And they had a witness. My brother. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the letter, feeling something inside me finally, completely die. Not pain. Not sadness. Just silence. Like the final note of a funeral song. But there was one last page. An attachment. A statement. Written by Caleb himself. I watched Emily become angry and unbalanced over the years. She never got the help she needed. I love her, but I can't lie for her anymore. I read it 3 times. Each word carving itself into my chest like a knife. I had shielded him from bruises, broken bones, a lifetime of trauma, and he called me unstable? He loved me, but not enough to tell the truth. Not enough to remember who took the beatings for him. Not enough to protect me the way I protected him. That's when I knew. I didn't want justice anymore. I wanted ruin. Revenge, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't scream or shout or crash through doors like a hammer. Revenge is quiet. Calculated. It waits until you're sipping from a glass you think is clean, and then reminds you it's poisoned. The day after I read Caleb's statement against me, I erased every trace of the person I used to be. No more Emily the victim. No more Emily the sister. I was now Emily the weapon. And I knew exactly where to strike. Step 1. Exposing the lie. I started with their charity, Restorative Horizons. Cute name. Sounded warm, hopeful. The perfect front for the changed man Dad pretended to be. But even perfect lies have cracks. I had Jamal pull internal traffic from their donation site. Turns out, multiple donations had been processed and then immediately refunded, but still counted toward official fundraising totals. Meaning they were faking financial growth. Classic laundering behavior. Even better, they were running the charity through Caleb's name. Dad couldn't legally hold financial authority due to prior charges. So technically, every false report was Caleb's crime. Delicious. Step 2. Document everything. I compiled 2 folders. Folder A had technical proof, system logs, IP trails, Caleb's laptop mirror software, metadata from the fake email statements, and screenshots of transactions tied directly to his devices. Folder B was more psychological, copies of Caleb's contradictory interview emails with my fake reporter identity, clips from his public talks where he told different versions of the same story, and records of his donation, visits to the church where our father was lauded as a role model. Together, the folders painted a portrait of not just fraud, but manipulation, collusion, and malicious defamation. Step 3. Reclaim the narrative. I launched a podcast under an anonymous name, The Forgiveness Trap. Just a voice, a mic, and the truth. Each episode dissected stories of survivors being gaslit by their abusers under the name of reconciliation. I shared case files breaking down events nearly identical to mine without ever saying my name. But I used all the same details: the shelter theft, the court betrayal, the brother who handed over the sword. The series took off fast. Viral fast. People connected to it. And the best part? Listeners started guessing who the story was about. Within 3 weeks, someone posted on Reddit, "Anyone else feel like this Emily character sounds a lot like Caleb Maddox's sister?" It exploded. I let the comments do the work. I stayed silent. Let the fire build. Then I sent folder A and folder B anonymously to 3 places: the IRS, the State Charity Board, a local investigative journalist named Delaney Cruz, famous for exposing corruption in nonprofit spaces. Delaney was ruthless, the kind of reporter who didn't knock, she kicked down the door. Within days, she was knocking on Restorative Horizon's office. And the article dropped 1 week later. Redemption or Racket? Behind the curtain of Restorative Horizons. They printed it front page, with images, included quotes from anonymous sources, laid out the suspicious donations, the digital trails, the mismatched narratives. And they named names. Richard Maddox, Caleb Maddox. I watched the fallout from my couch with a bowl of cold cereal. It was beautiful. Sponsors pulled out first. Then board members resigned. Then the state issued a formal audit. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part came when the story reached the district attorney's office. The same office building where I had stood in handcuffs, accused of crimes I hadn't committed. They reopened my case. And this time, they looked deeper. Within 2 weeks, I was called back to testify, not as a defendant, but as a witness. I walked into the courtroom in the same coat I'd been arrested in. Only this time, I stood tall, unshackled. And when they called Caleb to the stand, he looked right at me. That soft, apologetic look, the one he used when we were kids and he broke something and I lied to cover for him. But I didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge him at all. Let him squirm. Let him remember how many times I took the hit for him. Let him understand that this was mine now. His voice cracked during questioning. He tried to spin it. Said he wasn't aware of the full financial processes. Blamed it on Dad. Said he trusted too much. Said he never meant to hurt anyone. But the prosecutor had the folders, the screenshots, the emails he'd written when he thought he was charming a journalist. He slipped. More than once. And when they brought up the mirrored device trail, he froze completely. Caught. Cold. My name was cleared. The charges dropped. Publicly. An official apology was issued. But I didn't care about that. Because by then, they'd already lost everything. The charity dissolved. Dad's reputation, gone. Church affiliation severed. And Caleb? He became a cautionary tale. The brother who lied, framed his sister, sold out trauma for attention. He lost speaking gigs, lost sponsors, lost the only thing he ever really worshipped: admiration. He sent me a message. Just one. I didn't think you'd ever come after me. I didn't reply. Some silences are sacred. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because there was one more twist to deliver. One more truth they didn't know I knew. And it would tear apart what little remained. I wasn't just going to break them. I was going to flip the script entirely. I thought revenge would feel like fire. Like heat crawling up your spine. The crackling roar of justice being served hot and final. But when the dust settled and the news stopped talking, when the charity was shut down and Caleb vanished from every platform he'd once worshipped, I felt still. Not cold. Not empty. Just still. Because there was one last thing they didn't know I knew. And I had saved it, not for survival, but for silence. It started months before my arrest. A memory. One I had buried, locked behind years of noise and bruises and fear. It was a night like all the others. Dad drunk. Caleb crying. Me standing between them like a wall made of bone and love. But something was off. Dad wasn't just yelling. He was pleading. Just tell me the truth, he'd screamed. I remembered that clearly. And Caleb, shaking, eyes wet, whispered something I couldn't hear. Then Dad hit him. Hard. And Caleb didn't flinch. He smiled. At the time, I thought he'd gone numb, like I had so many times. But now I knew that smile wasn't numb. It was knowing. I went back through old journals I used to keep during my teen years. Notes, half-torn pages, scraps of memory. In one entry, I wrote, Caleb lied to me tonight. I don't know what about, but I saw it in his eyes. Another, a month later. Dad said I was poisoning Caleb's mind, but I think it's the other way around. I had ignored my instincts. Because love makes you stupid. Makes you loyal. Loyal to people who would hang you. I tracked down my mother's death certificate. Car crash. Officially ruled an accident. But something about it had always felt too convenient. She had left Dad once, a full week away. Caleb and I had gone with her to her sister's. Then she came back, and a week later, she died. I requested the police report. There was damage to the brake line. Unexplained. Never investigated further. I interviewed a mechanic anonymously, someone who'd reviewed the car years ago. He said, it looked cut, but no one asked questions back then. I sat with that knowledge for days. Until I found what I was really looking for. Caleb's old laptop. He had once mailed it to me after I moved away, said it was too slow for school. I had tossed it in a storage bin, forgot about it completely. But now it was gold. Jamal helped me bypass the dead OS and dig into the drive. Old files. Deleted messages. Hidden folders. And then I found it. A video. Timestamp. 4 months before Mom's death. It was filmed from under Caleb's bed, a hidden angle. In the video, Caleb is talking to someone. At first, I think it's a friend. But then the voice becomes clearer. Dad. And Caleb says, she said she's leaving again. Said she's taking him with her this time. Dad doesn't respond. Then Caleb says, you don't have to stop her. Just make sure she doesn't come back again. The screen went black. I dropped the laptop like it burned me. For minutes, I sat in the dark, mouth dry, ears ringing. And suddenly, everything made sense. The deal. The loyalty. The coldness. My brother hadn't just betrayed me. He hadn't just framed me. He hadn't just stood by as our father abused me. He had conspired in our mother's death. He was never the victim. I was. I always was. And I had wasted years shielding him from consequences he never deserved to be protected from. My father didn't brainwash Caleb. Caleb turned on all of us first. So I made one final move. I packaged the video, along with a timeline, a written statement, and a voice-over analysis. Then I sent it, not to the police, but to Delaney Cruz, the journalist who had already exposed them once. Subject line. Before the abuse, before the fraud. There was this. She dropped it like a bombshell. Headline. Was it ever redemption? New evidence suggests Caleb Maddox may have had a role in his mother's mysterious death. It trended globally within hours. Reddit, Twitter, YouTube. Commentators began dissecting the video frame by frame. Podcasts analyzed the body language. Some called it ambiguous. Some said it was too late to matter. But most? They saw the smile. That cold, calculated smile. Caleb issued a denial. Of course he did. Said it was taken out of context. Said he was a scared kid. Said the video was doctored. But the public didn't care. The court of opinion had already ruled. Sponsors abandoned him. Publishers pulled interviews. The last church that supported him quietly cut ties. And Dad? He disappeared from the public entirely. Rumors said he moved out of state. Another said he was hospitalized. I didn't care. I'd erased them both. One day, months later, I walked into a bookstore and saw a memoir on the shelf. Ashes. How I Survived the Family That Tried to Burn Me Down. The author? A pseudonym. But the story? All mine. Page 1 read. My name is not Emily, but I was her. And that's all it took. It became a bestseller. Not because it was sensational, but because it was true. And for once, I owned my truth. Not in courtrooms. Not on podcasts. but in my words. I never heard from Caleb again. No apology. No message. No closure. But I didn't need one. Because I finally understood the cruelest lesson of all. Sometimes, the monster isn't the one who hits you. It's the one you cover in blankets after they do.